Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MCU Perspectives, and today we're going to be discussing the 15th film to be released as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So, I really don't know what else I can say about the build-up for this film for me. I did enjoy the first Guardians movie, and it did make me aware of the characters, but I didn't really know what else they were going to do with the Guardians. When I heard that they were going to be making a second film, I just kind of thought, oh, okay, cool. But I think that I kind of had that reaction because at this point I was kind of getting numb to sort of the whole superhero aspects. Like at this point, it just felt like they were just throwing more stuff out there to get your money, and it felt the same way. And I kind of felt the same way with Guardians Volume 2 because I kind of thought because even films that were sequels weren't always sequels, so to speak. Like Captain America: Civil War, despite the fact that that had Captain America's name in it, it's kind of made fun of, is kind of poked fun at because it's technically like Avengers 3, even though it's because it features so many characters. And then when you got Guardians Volume 2 coming up, it's also at the same time, like, I was just kind of wondering, is just going to be another launching pad for more stuff? Is that what it's going to be? What, thankfully, it not only was actually a direct sequel, but it also was a really good one at that. How so? Well, let's just talk about the story. In this case, it does take place sometime after the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. The Guardians have, and it opens up with the Guardians being hired by a race of people called the Sovereign. Essentially, these gold people who pretty much have made it their mission to be the most perfect beings in the galaxy, even to the point where they actually genetically modify themselves from the point where they're conceived to be perfect warriors and so forth. And to ire them is to pretty much incur their wrath. Like even the smallest of offense, you could say, like, you could go so far as to say, I think your outfit looks stupid, and they'd probably just get pissed at you, and pretty much the entirety of them would want you dead, just because you wronged them slightly. But of course, but pretty much they've hired the Guardians to take out this interdimensional beast that's going to be coming to their planet shortly, and they think that's going to attack their I forgot what they were called. They're these batter. It's just kind of a battery source that's unique to the Sovereign, and they are called the Analyx batteries. Pretty as a which of course no one need the Analyx batteries. As such, the Guardians are when the monster appears, the Guardians are able to fend it off and ultimately and so as reward for their actions, they are given their reward as reward for their actions. The Sovereign hand over Nebula, who it turns out they had captured some time before, because she was trying to steal some of the Analyx batteries herself. And the reason the Guardians are after her is nothing personal like you would think, but because, well, there's a bounty on her head ever since what happened at Xandar in the first Guardians movie. As such, they're here to collect her and receive the bounty. As such, before they leave the queen, I suppose you could say the queen. I don't think. Well, okay, she probably isn't the queen. Hold on a sec. I had it written down in my notes. Their high priestess, who's I think named Aisha, actually kind of talks about how it kind of pokes fun at Peter's lineage about how he's half human, half something else, something chaotic. But Peter just kind of brushes it off and they leave. But it turns out that Rocket, for no other reason than he wanted to, wound up stealing some of the Analyx batteries himself, because apparently they are worth a pretty penny out everywhere else, hence why people have sometimes gone after them. As such, as the Guardians are leaving Sovereign space, a battalion of their ships go after them because they stole the batteries, and apparently this slight is enough to have the Guardians be near the top of their to kill list. As such, the Guardians to try and end up trying to outmaneuver all their ships, even going through this extra dimensional asteroid field, which only one Sovereign ship flies them through, and they're all being remotely controlled by the youth of the Sovereign, who are. It's kind of like and they treat it like they're playing video games. It's actually kind of fun. It's actually sort of amusing yet kind of tactically, but also tactically perfect. get your youth used to this carnage, so that when they kind of get their youth used to this carnage, so when they grow up, they don't have a problem with it. But while they are, because pretty much they need, because the closest inhabited planet they can hide out is this thing, is a planet called Bearheart, which in order to get there, they need to get to a warp that's nearby. But unfortunately, but even when they are still able to outmaneuver, well, even when they're able to maneuver through this asteroid field, it turns out the rest of the fleet flew around them, and on top of that, their ship has been damaged because of their flying through it, because Peter and Rocket were kind of having a dick measuring contest about who gets to fly the ship. As such, the ship is starting to get damaged. The ship is already damaged from them fighting over it, plus what the single sovereign ship was able to do. Them even taking out some of their engines. And unfortunately, as they fly out the other side, the rest of the ships come after them and just start blasting them to high heaven. However, before the Guardian ship is utterly destroyed, they wind up getting something saves them, and that something completely annihilating all the sovereign ships, which even they're wondering what the heck was that. And the only thing that we see is a single pod. That's a single white pod that's flying nearby, and we later learn. I think I might have missed this because even when I rewound to that scene, I couldn't see it. They say there was a man on there, which they're surprised by. However, they're still, as such, they are able to get to the warp, but because of the damage that their ship sustained, their ship ends up crashing, and well, pretty much everyone's quick to blame everyone. Rocket Peter, Gamora, both of them. But pretty much everyone's not happy. However, that argument is cut short when they detect that the ship followed them through. As such, the Guardians get into battle formation as the ship lands, and from it come two individuals. One is a girl named Mantis, this alien girl with mantis features with this antenna on her head and black eyes, who has empathic abilities. She can read your emotions just by touching you, and to a degree, she can make you feel emotion. She can change your emotions if she wants. If you're angry and she touches you, she can make you docile. She can put you to sleep, etc. But the other individual is her master, and this is a bearded guy who calls himself Ego, who says he's been looking for Peter for a while. Peter has no idea who the hell this guy is, and so he reveals that he's in fact Peter's father. Which, yeah, I totally buy. Pretty much what's going on is that Ego has apparently been spending years looking for Peter, as Ego was the one that apparently hired Yondu and his crew to get Peter from Earth and bring him to him. It's just that Yondu just didn't keep his end of the bargain and kept Peter for himself, and because according to Peter, he was small and skinny and could reach into places that the other Ravagers couldn't get into, so that's why they wanted to keep him. As such, Ego says that he's been looking for him ever since, and he finally managed to get a lead when he heard tell of what happened on Xandar, of a man who was able to hold an Infinity Stone in his hand without dying. And so he thought that was probably Peter, and so he managed to finally track him down to where we saw him when they were fighting the Sovereign. As such, Peter, of course, at this time, he steps away to, well, go to the bathroom, pretty much. But Peter, even here, is kind of suspicious of this guy. The fact that he just showed up that he happened to come at just the right time, and so forth. But Gamora also tries encouraging Peter that maybe this is a good idea, and apparently a story that Peter has told her, at least when he was drunk, is that when he was a kid, because he never knew his dad, he used to keep a picture of David Hasselhoff around that he liked to show to people, and tell them that David Hasselhoff was his dad, and that the reason he never saw him was because he was off doing something important, and so that he never had time for him. As such, Gamora says that maybe this is his opportunity to meet his Hasselhoff. And while Peter is still on the fence about this, he does decide to at least give him a shot. As such, pretty much the Guardians end up splitting up, with Peter, Drax, and Gamora going with Ego and Mantis, while Groot and Rocket stay behind to both repair the ship and keep an eye on Nebula since they still have her locked up. As such, the Guardians go As such, the Guardians take Ego's ship as they fly off to his planet, and on the way there, we do get some more character building. You get some more character establishing stuff, especially with Mantis, as we learn about her empath abilities. And we apparently learn that the reason Ego keeps her around is because she helps him sleep. Is because she uses her abilities to help him sleep. As he has a hard time even doing that because his thoughts are on his children. More on that later. But eventually they do But in the meantime, though, this movie also checks us back in with Yondu as we see him on this planet. Hold on, I have it written down in my notes. Contraxia, which is apparently like a pleasure planet, so to speak. It's where it's pretty much where all the hoodlums it's where all the hoodlums and outlaws go to pretty much have a good time. As there are bars, there are multiple robots there that are obviously there just to entertain guests and possibly have sex with them if they ask. And we see Yondu and his crew have stopped there, and as Yondu is kind of finishing up, as Yondu's getting dressed after most likely having sex with one of the robots, he sees someone that he knows. And I don't know this character's name. He's apparently in the comics, but as I said, I don't know. I didn't know about the Guardians till after this, and I still haven't picked up a Guardians comic before this, so But he's played by Sylvester Stallone, so I'm just gonna call him Stallone. And so once Yondu sees him, he runs out and actually says he hasn't, and actually tries showing him respect, wants to say hi to him, wants to talk to him about something. But the instant Stallone sees him, he gets ticked off and immediately leaves, telling people that own this place, just by serving him here, we are never going to come back here. And the thing is, it's because Stallone is supposed to be kind of like the head of, like, the Ravagers are not just Yondu and his crew. It turns out they're a whole big thing. There are a lot of Ravager crews out across the galaxy, and all of them do what Ravagers do. They scavenge, they steal, they threaten. They pretty much do all this stuff. But one rule they have is they don't do kidnappings, and they don't hawk children. And unfortunately, Yondu kind of broke that code with Peter, or at least that's what we hear at the beginning. At least that's what we assume. And as a result, he's actually been exiled. Ever since that day, he's been a Ravager in name only. As far as the rest of the Ravagers of the universe are concerned, he's nothing to them. And so, whenever they actually do anything, and so as a result of this, Stallone pretty much tells them that on the day that that he doesn't belong with them, and while he may not be like this, he doesn't consider him a Ravager. And on the day that he dies, they're not going to be shooting off any lights for fireworks or something for him, which does kind of hit Yondu, and which kind of hits Yondu. Meanwhile, in the background, one of his crew is talking about how Yondu's kind of gotten soft and how he would have led them to glory, but hasn't so far. But before Yondu can further soak in his own self-pity, he's suddenly approached by the High Priestess Aisha of the Sovereign, who offers him a bounty, which we later learn is she wants Yondu and his crew to capture the Guardians of the Galaxy and bring them back to the Sovereign home planet so they can be executed. Yondu ends up taking this bounty, and they manage to find where the Guardian ship is on Bearheart, which I'm guessing the Sovereign were able to find because of where they went. As such, Yondu and all of his crew get there, but Rocket, being Rocket, is prepared for all this and set up a bunch of traps to pretty much knock down most of Yondu's crew, either just knocking them out, tranking them, blowing them all over the place. He's obviously just having a ball. And he managed to take out a good chunk of Yondu's crew, but Yondu ultimately gets him to a standstill by having his little thin arrow come right up to Rocket's throat and kind of stopping him. As such, he and his crew surround him, but Yondu decides, instead of actually taking him in, he says, they wanted me to catch you guys, but I'll take those batteries instead. Those are worth $250,000. And this doesn't sit well with his crew, because the bounty on the Guardians was pretty much $1 million. So a quarter of that is just not even worth it. And as such, he keeps trying to tell, and this just further causes more debate between all the Ravagers, as half of them now think that Yondu is being too soft. That whenever it comes to Peter and so forth, he's willing to let him go, even after all the betrayals. Even with the last film, part of the deal with the Guardians and Yondu is that once it was all over, Yondu could have the Power Stone, and yet Peter just sent him off with a troll doll while he handed the real Power Stone over to the Nova Corps. So. And yet Yondu has never actually gotten back, and yet Yondu has never done anything to get back at Peter for that. And apparently even all those other times, Yondu has just even other times that Peter has betrayed him, Yondu has just let him walk. So at this point, half of Yondu's crew is fed up of this, and they want to stage a mutiny, while the other half is ready to fight on Yondu's behalf to stop it. However, before this can escalate further, Yondu's head fin gets shot and he gets knocked out, and the person that shot him was Nebula. As it turns out that as things are escalating with Rocket and Yondu's crew, Nebula was able to convince Groot, and that's something I forgot to mention. Groot is back in this movie, except that since the last films had him be shredded apart, he's now a baby because of that little root that Rocket was able to save. And so Nebula was able to talk Baby Groot into letting her go so that she could save Rocket. Only, as you kind of expect, instead of actually saving Rocket, she just shot Yondu's head fin, which knocks him out, and then tased Rocket, allowing the Ravagers to easily catch them, and allowing the Ravagers to easily take Baby Groot, Rocket, and unfortunately Yondu. Which in turn just makes things even worse, as the side that wants to mutiny manages to overpower Yondu's side. We don't see it, but we do see how things go later, and yeah, things aren't looking good. And Yondu isn't exactly happy with this little development, especially as the other side that wants to mutiny are taking every single crew member that was still loyal to Yondu, and then just throwing them out the airlock, while Yondu just sits there, kind of passive and just kind of not doing anything, while the crew members are just constantly pleading and begging with him not to help them, while he just sits there helpless. Eventually, everyone that was loyal to Yondu is now dead, and so the leader of this mutiny proclaims that the universe will now fear him, and we learn that this guy's name is Taserface. And yeah, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I thought this guy was kind of generic, because I forgot his name when I rewatched this movie. But the instant I heard it again, I thought, oh, I remember this. And yeah, it's obvious this guy was like one of those 90s characters that was invented back then to be rough and gruff, and you're to be, oh, so gritty, I use big guns, I grit my teeth every time I talk, that sort of guy. Just with a name like Taserface, you kind of expect that. And so every time anybody hears his name, they all just make fun of him. Like the instant he says his name out during all this, Rocket just starts ribbing him to the point where even the rest of the crew starts snickering and laughing. But eventually Taserface, which I'm gonna just keep calling him that because it's perfect, and I don't know what his real name is, finally just is fed up with Rocket and his crap, and has him and Yondu thrown in a cell so they can deliver them back to. So they can at least deliver them to the Sovereign. All at the same time, or at least Rocket anyway. They have, for Yondu, it turns out that he's got a bunch of Kree bounties on his head, so they're going to turn him over to them. In the meantime, they turn Baby Groot into their little mascot by giving him a little space jumpsuit and everything. However, with Rocket and Yondu now in the cell, they do have a brief talk, and Yondu kind of talks about his own history with the Ravagers and so forth, about how before they exiled him, they were like the closest thing to a family he got. How they were kind of like the Guardians in that sense, that they used to go around doing whatever they wanted, but then he broke their code, and started working for Ego. Rocket does reveal to him that Peter and the rest of the Guardians are with Ego heading back to his planet. And while Yondu doesn't have a visible reaction to this, after hearing that, he actually does talk to Rocket and say, listen, I think I know a way that we can get out of here. Because it turns out the little head fin he had before was not the only one he had. He had another one, a prototype that he kept in his side drawer. But unfortunately, they can't get to it but thankfully there's someone that can, and that one is Baby Groot. As such, after Baby Groot made fun of as they're just treating him like a little baby, he does catch up. He does walk by the cell with Rocket and Yondu. And Yondu and Rocket tell him that he needs to go to his bedside table and get his head fin, which is a giant red fin that he keeps by. However, Baby Groot, for some reason, can't seem to recognize what is what. As every time he goes back to find something, he just keeps finding something different. Like, one time he brings back Yondu's underwear. Another time he brings back one of the crew members' cybernetic eyes. Another point he brings back a guy's toe, which even Yondu and Rocket are horrified by because they don't have... Because, in order to do that, the idea is that he just cut off a guy's toe and brought it back. And even Rocket's like, tell me you have, a drawer of people's toes, somewhere around the ship. And it's like, no, we don't. And Rocket's like, okay, then let's never speak of this again. It's just the entire scene is just pure hijinks. Eventually Yondu tells him, look, just go to the thing that you want has this symbol on it, and he shows him the symbol of the Ravagers, which is that flaming, a little comet thing, which I think might be the Star-Lord symbol, but don't quote me on that. And while Groot initially thinks it's a hat, and then when he learns it isn't, he talks about how he hates hats on everybody, but not on everybody. He does actually find the drawer that has the head fin in it, but once again he grabs the wrong thing when he goes in there, only for one of the crew members to actually see Groot and see what he's doing. Only instead of immediately reporting him and telling everyone what Yondu and Rocket are doing, he grabs the fin himself. He grabs Groot and the fin and brings them both to Yondu. As it turns out that this crew member, because we had seen him little by little, had seen him here and there, and don't ask me for his name, I don't remember it. It turns out that he was playing possum, very much being a double agent, because he knew that if he spoke up, then he would be thrown out the airlock as well, and he does still believe in Yondu and is still on his side. As such, with his help, Yondu and Rocket are able to break out of their cell, and so Rocket is able to attach the fin to Yondu's head, allowing him control of his arrow again. In the meantime, though, before all this, Nebula actually was allowed to leave the ship as well, as she wanted, as in return for helping the Ravagers with their bounty, she wants 10% of their earnings, and she wants her own rocket. And her intent is to go to the planet Ego, to Ego's planet, and pretty much kill Gamora. As apparently, as we learn, that part of the reasons that she and Gamora don't get along is because when they were kids and always fighting, Thanos would pretty much make it so that every time that Nebula lost to Gamora, I think I just keep calling her Gamora. Sorry, I mean Nebula. This is Nebula. I'm getting their names mixed up. Sorry. Pretty much every time Gamora and Nebula fought, every time Nebula lost to Gamora, he would replace a part of her with something robotic. And so, but unfortunately, every time Gamora and Nebula fought, Nebula kept losing, and so just bit by bit, she was constantly being turned into this cybernetic abomination that you see right now, that we see in these movies, and it's because of this that she has a grudge against both Nebula. Sorry, I keep getting their names mixed up. I'm sorry. That Nebula has a grudge against Gamora and Thanos. As such, she says that what she wants to do with her winnings is that she wants to take revenge against her sister and their father, and so she takes a ship and heads to Ego. In the meantime, though, back with Yondu and Rocket, they pretty much just have a ball. They put on some of Peter's music and blast it across the ship, and Yondu just uses arrow to pretty much just kill every single person that stands in their way as they make their way to the center of the ship, while the crewmate is getting a spare ship ready, and getting a little spare ship they have ready for them to take off on. And so just bit by bit, they're just going through everything, and we see Rocket and Groot do help out a little bit as they take out some of the crew members themselves. So as they manage to get to the center of the ship where all the security cameras are, and just every time someone gets close to that, Yondu just keeps shooting them with the arrow, and it's just a great scene and just kind of darkly fun, and it's just so dark yet humorous. But in the midst of it all, Taserface ends up finally getting killed as Yondu sets his arrow on fire and blasts it right into a main line in the ship, causing the whole place to explode. Thankfully, the spare ship is ready, so Baby Groot, Rocket, and Yondu are able to get down there. But Taserface decides that if he's going to go down, he's at least taking Yondu with him. And so just before he dies, he manages to contact the Sovereign and give him the coordinates of Yondu's ship, telling them that, just kind of pretty much wanting them to promise that when they dies, that they'll tell him the one that betrayed them was Taserface, which in turn causes the Sovereign woman he's talking to just start laughing right in his face. Which I love that. Just before he dies, he pretty much just has a "you gotta be kidding me" face. It's just kind of funny, which is another thing this film excels in. But yeah, they manage to escape, but Rocket is in a hurry to try and get to Ego and his planet, as apparently, as like I said, once Rocket mentioned that Peter was with Ego, he did see a look in Yondu's face that kind of let him know that Ego is bad news. And of course, we'll get to that later. And so we realize they have to get there in a hurry, and so they start immediately going to every space jump that they can, which, yeah, it's not safe. Apparently, going 50 is hazardous, and they're going through 700. And so they just start going around the galaxy as space just seems to warp on their ship. It's also where we get our Stan Lee cameo, as one of the planets they pass by is the planet of a race of aliens called the Watchers. These ancient celestial beings whose sole duty is to watch, observe, and record, but never interfere. And so we see three of them as they're standing on a rock, as we see Stan Lee in a spacesuit telling them about his adventure, about his various cameos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I just love that. I love that. Love that. Just kind of somewhat confirming that apparently he's a watcher, or at the very least some kind of cosmic entity, which it's his universe. I wouldn't be surprised if Stan Lee was just watching over the universe, like seeing all the stars suddenly form into Stan Lee's smiling face, but that would be kind of cool. Actually, that would be really cool. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Anyway, with that in mind, we can let's go back to talk. Let's also talk back to the other half of the Guardians. They eventually manage to reach Ego's planet, and as they go there, we see it looks like a nice place. It's got all these nice wonders. It's got all these great wonders and so forth. And they eventually go to what looks like a main palace, and Ego relays his backstory to the Guardians. Apparently, he is something called a Celestial, pretty much a almost all-powerful being in the universe that can do many great things. Like, they're not gods, or at the very least, if they are, it's lowercase g, not capital, but they are still very powerful. And while he may not know, and pretty much what this means is that he can do a lot of great things and has a lot of great power, though even he doesn't know where he came from. It just one day he was. And one day he was, in the form of a celestial brain, so to speak. And over the course of a millennia, he eventually learned to master his powers and learned that he could affect the molecules around them and turn them into any shape he wanted. And so, bit by bit, he started using the molecules to build a planet. The very planet that they're standing on right now, which means that at the center of the planet is Ego's real mind. So, is pretty much the real Ego. Like, the person they're talking to right now is a manifestation, which is where more of his backstory comes in. Because as time went on, Ego wanted to know more about the universe Ego wanted to know more about the universe. He wanted to know if there was more than just him out there. And as such, he created a body that has pretty much everything a body has. Organs, a reproductive system, pain, nerve endings, etc. Pretty much everything that a body would have. And so he set out into the galaxy to discover life, and that's when he did. And shortly after that was when he encountered Peter's mother, and they formed a relationship, even telling Peter that he did genuinely love her and cared for her, though this makes Peter say, well, then why didn't you stick around? Which, yeah, does become sort of a thing as the film goes on. However, as they're having this moment, there's a moment as Drax and Mantis are talking, and Mantis talks about how she knows Ego, that he found her when she was a larva. He brought her to his planet and raised her. And so Drax and her are talking, and Drax tells her that he thinks she's hideous, which does seem like an insult at first, but Drax tells her that that's also kind of a good thing. That's because if you're hideous, then when you find someone that loves you, then they'll love you for who you truly are and not for how you look on the outside, which Yeah, it's an insult. We later learn that he called her hideous because he wanted to stay off any affections that she had for him. But in the same way, it is sort of nice, and that is a nice thing to say. But this causes Mantis to actually kind of want to tell Drax something. Though before she can, Gamora comes outside and kind of interrupts them, and Mantis kind of shuts up and tells them where they're going to be staying. Although Gamora did overhear them talking, and so she now is starting to get curious about what Mantis was going to tell Drax, but then stop when she showed up. Peter and Ego start kind of talking, and they actually are discussing things. And Ego's just trying to convince Peter that he did love his mom, that he did care for her, but he keeps trying to tell her, "I'm not." It's like, "I'm here for you now. We can be a family, and as long as you're here, you have abilities and powers like mine." And so he starts explaining to him that and so he does start explaining to him because again, but the center of the planet is Ego's brain, and that's also one of the explanations he gives for why he didn't stay with Peter's mom, because if he stays away from his planet for too long, eventually his physical form just withers and dies. So he can't. So he can leave the planet, but eventually he has to return, or otherwise he will die, or at the very least his physical form will die. Though to be fair, from what we see later, he could probably just make another. I don't know, but whatever. But either way, Ego does try to appeal to Peter and explain to him about his powers, and tells him that he has to concentrate and he do something, and so Peter is able to actually tap into the light at the center of the planet, and is able to create a light show, which he uses to kind of create a ball, which kind of creates this corny little moment between Peter and Ego as they start playing catch with it and just start having this father-son moment, because apparently Peter talked about how he saw all the other kids out there playing catch with their dads. So it's corny and a little funny, but somewhat cute. So I'll give it a slight pass. I'll still say it's corny and a little dumb, but I'll give it a slight pass. But only just this much. But only by this much. But anyway, as such, Peter is kind of in a bit of a good mood, and so later on he does go to see Gamora and tries to get her to dance with him, because they had talked about earlier, because he and Drax had a conversation earlier about how there are people in the universe that dance and some that don't. And so it's just kind of not. But he does convince her to dance with him to one of the songs, and tries to kind of stave a relationship, because something they're hinting even from the first Guardians, they talk about how there is a thing there that's unspoken, but Gamora keeps trying to deny it. But in the meantime, though, she's still thinking about what happened earlier with Drax, that Mantis was going to say something to him, but she stopped. So she thinks that there's maybe something a bit wrong here, and that Ego might be hiding something from him. Of course, upon hearing this, Peter is actually a little angry now, because after that little talk that Peter had with Ego, he's actually now kind of opening up to having Ego be his father. But now, and Gamora was the one that convinced him to even come here in the first place, and now she's telling him maybe we shouldn't be jumping into this, and yet jumping into this, he's something like, "Well, you're the one that told me to come here. Now you're telling me not to trust him." And so they get into a fight, and Gamora ends up leaving and going to a field where she kind of where she tries to be alone. But this ultimately gets interrupted when Nebula shows up in the ship that she took from the Ravagers and just starts shooting at her. Gamora is able to jump into a cave and hide, but Nebula is so determined to get her, she rams the ship right into the cave and keeps shooting at her, which, yeah, is not a good idea. It gets rammed right into the ship and it gets heavily damaged, knocking one of the guns off that Gamora is able to grab and shoot the ship, causing it to blow up. Nebula gets almost stuck in the ship, almost crushed, but Gamora goes in and tries to save her, and she ultimately manages to. But Nebula is still on the warpath, as after she's saved, she just starts trying to choke the life out of Gamora, and the two just keep fighting, and even Gamora is just getting like, "You're kidding me right now, right?" But eventually, as the fight goes on, and it almost turns into Nebula's favor, to the point where she's choking her and has a knife ready to stab her, she just stops. Because, well, Gamora still saved her there. At which point she kind of just breaks down and talks about how you didn't care. All you wanted to do was win. All you wanted to do was beat me, but all I wanted was a sister. And Admittedly, this is a kind of small scene that I really do like in this film because it kind of opens up to understand more of Nebula's character. Like in the last film, she was just kind of like we saw her anger as a daughter of Thanos, but here we see more of her anger and why she does hate her sister, even though that she's no longer working for Thanos, even though neither of them are working for Thanos anymore, because she hates her sister. And okay, let me elaborate. She hates her because when she was adopted, she thought that they might be able to be a family. But thanks to Thanos's proud parenting skills, rather than showing her affection, he tried making them into weapons. And so every time they bested each other, and so Nebula, each time they fought, was just made less and less, for lack of a better term, human, just tortured over and over. And so as a result of this, it developed her hatred into, and so she just kind of, that's what developed her hatred of Gamora and Thanos. As it was because Gamora beating her every time kind of made her into this, and it did start to create some resentment between the two, to the point where even after all this time, she just blames Gamora for all this, for what's happened to her. And it is legitimately sad, and it's also the first point in the film where we actually see them starting to kind of drop their barriers and actually starting to bond a bit, as now they're actually talking, which is nice. Which is nice, a little heartwarming. I like that. But as they're in the cave, but during this talk, they notice that with the recent battle, they realize that there's something further down the cave, and so the two go to investigate. In the meantime, Ego goes to talk to Peter and tells him about what he had done, and tells him about what exactly he had done, about what he saw what happened with Gamora. And so he tries telling him that it's going to be fine, and then he tells him how as long as he is on this planet, he's going to be immortal. He'll be able to do that with maybe a millennia of practice. Peter will probably be able to do everything that Ego can do. He can this entire planet, like he can pretty much forge, like as time goes on, this planet can be his. He'll be able to do whatever he wants. He'll be a celestial. He'll be pretty much a celestial himself, and that as long as he's here, he's pretty much immortal. And so Peter, of course, is like, "Oh my God, this is great. This is awesome." But come on. But Ego starts talking about how. But then Ego starts hearing the song. I forgot what it was. I'll forget it. Never mind. Just drop that. But he starts talking. But he compares it to himself, saying that a sailor bearing gifts. How he came to Earth, bearing gifts with one to Peter's mom, giving her Peter, and Peter to the Guardians by setting Gamora free. But even though he loved the woman, he had to go back to the sea because that was his true calling. And so he brings Peter back to the palace because he wants to tell him something. And so when he brings him there, he pretty much gives Peter a cosmic awareness, giving him something that pretty much allows Peter to see the ends of see the universe. And Peter seems to be kind of drinking the Kool-Aid right here, saying it's beautiful, this is amazing. And so, but then Ego kind of starts to elaborate on things. He does, as he starts explaining more of his backstory and why he sought out Peter. You see, it turns out that when Ego sought out new life in the universe, he found it disappointing. Like, he looked at this and all and just thought, is that all? Is that all there is? And so he thought that even Peter told him that with living forever like this, it's bound to be boring. And Ego responded, yes, it would be if you don't have a purpose. And so as Ego looked at the universe, he thought this should be his purpose. He thought he finally found a purpose. He thought if he can make he wants to make the universe in his image, and pretty much just make everything throughout the galaxy him. And that plays into why he traveled across the universe. You see, in the beginning of the film, we actually did see younger versions of Peter's mom and Ego as they were hanging out, and Ego showed Peter's mom something that this plant or whatever that he had put in the ground, and he told her that they were all across the galaxy. And these plants are actually a physical extension of Ego himself that he placed in the ground and took root. And pretty much with his power, he can use these plants when they will reach maturity and pretty much just expand out across whatever planet they're on, pretty much consuming the planet and making it an extension of Ego. That's what his end goal was to be more than just a god, to be a celestial, to be everything, all life in the universe would be him. But unfortunately, there was a snag in that plan. Namely, that despite all his power, such a feat would be impossible for one celestial. And so he decided that he needed another. And so, as he traveled around the galaxy, he not only deposited his seed in the planets, but also in the women of the universe. It turns out that he got around a bit. And it turns out that Peter isn't the only child that he sired. He went to many planets, many galaxies, and sired children with every single species he could find. And that's actually exactly what Gamora and Nebula find in the bottom of the cave, as they find an entire cavern filled up with the skeletons of Ego's kids. It turns out that, and it turns out this is actually what Yondu was doing. It turns out Peter wasn't the first kid that he captured for Ego. Yondu was the one. While Ego actually hired Yondu to go to each planet and take his kids and bring them back there so that he could use them to help create what he called the expansion. But unfortunately, despite the fact these kids all were half Ego, half their mothers, none of them had the celestial gene. So unfortunately, they all died out. He couldn't use them. But Peter is different. He does have the celestial gene, as shown when he was actually able to utilize the power he was able to use Ego's power and even hold the Power Stone in the first Guardians movie. And so with Peter here, he can finally do the expansion and just be beyond mortal and just be beyond immortal. They'll pretty much just be he and Peter will pretty much be all. Which that's not a good thing. But at this point, Peter's kind of in a trance because of what Ego did to him, so he isn't exactly objecting to this at the moment. And at the same time, Mantis is overhearing all this and realizes that she needs to get the Guardians off the planet, as she goes to wake Drax up and tells him about all this. And at that same time, Gamora and Nebula show up, and Gamora wants to know everything, but Drax tells her that Mantis told him everything as well. And so they realize they need to get off this planet, and so Mantis tells them they need to get off this planet, but the Guardians but regardless of what's going on, Gamora and Drax are not going to leave without Peter, because even despite all the bickering they do, they're a family, and they're not just going to abandon Peter, and they're not going to just abandon Peter just because Ego's got a hold on him. So as such, in the meantime, Peter, as he takes all this in, starts kind of talking about, well, what about my friends? And Ego tells him that's just your mortal side. They're beneath you. But then Peter says, but what about my mother? You said you loved her, right? And Ego does actually admit he wasn't lying about that. He did love Peter's mother, to the point where he actually traveled to Earth 3 times just to see her, and he knows that if he had traveled there a 4th time, he wouldn't have been able to leave. And unfortunately for Ego, that would have gotten in the way of his grand mission to make everything him. And so the last time he visited Earth, he put a tumor in her head. Ego himself was the reason that Peter's mom got cancer. And the instant Peter hears that, it brings him right out of his celestial trance, and he immediately is pissed at Ego. And before Ego can even have a chance to explain himself, Peter just pulls out his guns and just shoots him to high heaven. But of course, since Ego's a celestial, his body just reforms, and he just finally and now all Peter did was piss him off, as he immediately starts saying, "You selfish," as he just starts calling him selfish, how he chose the form directly, especially for him. Even says, "I could have taken any form." He even assumes the form of David Hasselhoff. "I could have done anything." And he turns back, "But I chose this, and you are just being an ungrateful little brat." Peter is just, but at this point, Peter's having none of this. Ego killed his mother. He wants him dead. And so, at this point, he doesn't give a damn what his grand scheme is. Peter doesn't want this selfish celestial monster to be anywhere near him. And so, Ego says, well, fine, if that's how you're going to be, then let's see how you like being a battery for 1,000 years. And so, Ego suddenly used his connection to the planet to cause these giant energy tendrils to spout from the ground and impale Peter. It doesn't kill him, but it does exactly what Ego said. It uses Peter as a power source so that he can finally fuel the expansion across the galaxy as we see the planets from all across the universe start to react and start to grow and expand across across all the various planets. But at that point that the Guardians wind up bursting in to save Peter. And then that's when we suddenly see Yondu and Rocket come blasting in, with Yondu piloting a ship flying right into the planet and smashing directly into Ego, which allows them to free Peter. As such, all of them, Peter and the rest of the Guardians get on the ship, and Peter said, and their first thought is just to get the heck out of there. But Peter says, no, Ego wants to turn on the entire galaxy wants to consume the entire galaxy. We need to destroy him. But Mantis tells him that and Yondu thinks they're fine because he just destroyed Ego, but Mantis tells him, no, we didn't. That was just a manifestation of his presence. He will come back at any time, which, yeah, he starts to, even forming a larger body. And so the group manages to blast out of the ship, blast out of the palace, and start flying into the ground, because they need to get to the center of the planet, because at the center of the planet is the real Ego. If they can kill that, then the rest of him will go. But at the same time, as if they manage to fly down, blasting everything in their path with lasers and just to try and form a path, and they manage to get to the center of Ego, where his brain is. And of course, in the center of it is always like this big pulsing thing. Well, is this big pulsing thing, and I forgot to mention that outside of the planet, there's the crew member that was still loyal to Yondu. He's keeping watch over everything, but as he's watching over the planet, he suddenly sees the Sovereign porting in, and he tries to alert Yondu, but the radio is cutting out. As such, when they do manage to get there, the group realizes they have to try and find a way to drill to the center of Ego and take him out, because at this point if the brain is, that's Ego. That is his center. Destroy that, then everything else will fall. And so but at this point, before they can drill directly to Ego, that's when the Sovereign attack. The Sovereign attack, just blasting the ship and just blasting the ship, and even in the midst of all the flying, a few of the Guardians end up falling out of the ship, which includes Gamora, Mantis, Nebula, and Drax. While Peter, Rocket. Well, no, I think also Rocket. Never mind. I think. I don't know. I'm trying to keep track of everything. I'm trying to keep track of everything. But either way, Peter and Yondu are still on the ship, along with Baby Groot and I think Rocket, but don't quote me on that. I think Rocket fell out with them. Either way, the Sovereign think they can use this opportunity to kill Peter, but they do manage to destroy the Sovereign ships with all the lasers, just pretty much putting an end to them. But their ship ultimately gets destroyed. Their ship ultimately gets destroyed, though Peter and Yondu and everyone else on there is able to be saved, with Yondu coming down using his arrow as a means to save himself, with Peter calling him saying he looks like Marry Poppins, and of course, since Yondu has no idea who Marry Poppins is, he takes that as a compliment because Peter says he's cool, and we get our meme, everybody. He says, "I'm Marry Poppins, y'all!" There, I made my quota. But of course, Ego is still a problem. So the problem in Ego is waking up. They try to delay everything by having Mantis use her powers to put Ego to sleep. Ego sleeps so he doesn't hurt them, they didn't destroy all the Sovereign. I'm sorry, I jumped a gun there. They didn't destroy all of the Sovereign. They did all the Sovereign ships, but pretty much they realize that as long as Ego's asleep, they have to get to the center of the core. So while the rest of the Guardians face the rest of the Sovereign before they're all destroyed, Peter, Rocket and Groot managed to go into the little hole, managed to find the hole that they made to get into to Ego. But unfortunately, the hole weren't able to get that. They weren't able to drill that big in, so they can't. So none of them can really fit, except for Groot. As such, Rocket is able to make a bomb utilizing the batteries they stole from the Sovereign and a timer that he had. And he pretty much gives Groot instructions that hit a lever to start the timer, hit a lever to engage everything, and another button to set the timer, but don't hit the fourth button, or else the thing will just blow and they'll all die. And of course, we have a little gag where Groot thinks he has to hit the fourth button, but yeah, he doesn't. And plus tape. But yeah, Baby Groot does get it, and he starts trying to make his way into Ego with the bomb. But of course, things are still escalating, and eventually the Sovereign are destroyed. But with their destruction, a bit of the debris actually comes up and hits Mantis, knocking her out. And since she's no longer awake, she's no longer able to influence Ego, and he wakes back up, and he is greatly pissed off. As such, the Guardians realize they have to get out of here. The Guardians realize they have to work fast, and so Peter has to fend off Ego, while the rest of the Guardians have to try and defend themselves against Ego and what he's doing against Ego and all of his might, which is kind of hard considering that he controls everything right now. And so pretty much they called it, and so Yondu's able to call his ship down, and so Peter ends up giving Drax a jetpack so he can fly up to the surface and meet the ship so he can drop Mantis off. But things just continue to escalate and get out of hand as Yondu is doing everything he can, as Yondu is using his arrow to destroy as many of the these energy tentacles as they can. Rocket is using his laser to try and hold them off. Gamora and Nebula are just jumping from pillar to pillar as they're trying to find the way back, as they're trying to get up to the surface as well, Groot's still trying to make his way to the center, to Ego's center, but Ego is just bit by bit getting stronger and stronger, and while his attention is on Peter, he knows where each of the Guardians are, and he just starts slowly he just starts covering them in rock. He starts completely covering Yondu. He manages to wrap up Rocket, starts trying to trap him. He does the same thing to Gamora and Nebula, seemingly kind of trapping them as well, and just keeps getting worse and worse. And he even starts kind of causing the ground beneath Drax's feet to start to sink, and even holding the ship in place. He's just telling Peter, at this point you need to knock it off. At this point you just need to knock this off. You're pissing me off, and it's doing nothing. And so he keeps trying to use Peter as another, and he tries again to use Peter as a power source, which in turn causes him to continue his expansion. But Yondu manages to inspire one last little bit in Peter, and tells him that, look, it's like, listen, Peter, it's not what I go. It's like, I don't control my head, this fin in my head, I control my heart, because they had a conversation about that, when Peter talked about his powers. And so Peter actually takes it to heart, and he starts thinking about everybody that's been there for his life. His mother, the rest of the Guardians, all the fun times he's had, and even with Yondu. And yeah, I forgot to mention that. It turns out the reason that Yondu didn't deliver Peter to Ego is because Yondu learned what happened to the rest of Ego's kids, and he didn't want that same thing to happen to Peter. And so he decided to just take him in, and without delivering him. And so pretty much Peter realizes that these are his family. These are the people that are closest to him. And it actually gives him enough power to start utilizing Ego's powers himself. And it just leads to a cool fight as they're just flying around this cavern, just beating the crap out of each other. And this brief distraction allows the rest of the Guardians to get free from all of Ego's traps and try and escape. Unfortunately, though, as such, Baby Groot does manage to get to the center, get to Ego's brain, and place the bomb on him, and successfully sets the timer for 5 minutes. But again, unfortunately, they're still kind of. Fortunately, it means they also have a limited time, and they have to get out of there. As such, Rocket tries to come back and get Yondu, but Yondu says he's not leaving without Peter. And Rocket says, if you stay here, you're going to die, but Yondu says he's not going to be leaving. And he just kind of says, I'm just kind of garbage, and I haven't done any good things in my life, so I need to do this. And so Rocket gives him these two things. One is a jetpack, and one is a spacesuit. He's only got one of each, so he pretty much just means that no matter that only one person is that at this point only one person is going to make it out of here alive. That if Rocket leaves with Baby Groot, because Baby Groot came back to Rocket. There's only one person after him can make it out. And at that point, he pretty much welcomes Yondu into the Guardians of the Galaxy, or at the very least, Groot does. Saying pretty much, or at least Groot does, as they fly away. As such, Peter and Ego just keep fighting it, just keep duking it out. And there's this cool, and there's an especially funny part of the fight where Ego creates a giant rock body that try and fly forward, and Peter ends up pulling resources to make himself turn into a giant yellow Pac-Man, which is stupid, but I love it. But the battle ultimately ends with them both winded and kind of falling onto a platform. At this point, though, the timer is reaching 0, and Ego is fully aware of this, and he's trying to get to the bomb, but Peter is just constantly holding him back, saying, no, you're not going to do that. And Ego says, no, you have to let me do this. You have to let me stop that, please. It's like, you're not going to be a god. You're just going to be one of them. Peter says, well, what's wrong with that? And at which point, the bomb finally hits 0, and Ego's brain is obliterated. And so with the destruction, Ego turns the dust in Peter's hands as the rest of the planet starts falling apart, and with his destruction, Peter's powers also fade as well. But of course, at that point, Yondu comes in, saving Peter and flying away from the planet. But unfortunately, they don't exactly. But as they're flying away, Yondu puts the suit on Peter, because their suits are like these little things that if you put them on, it covers your body in this kind of holographic thing, protects you from space, it gives you your own oxygen supply. And Peter realizes that what Yondu is doing, and he's like, no, you can't do this. But Yondu, when he saves him, tells him he may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy. And so Yondu manages to get Peter away off the planet Ego as it starts crumbling in on itself. But ultimately means that Yondu freezes to death in space as Peter watches him die. But the last thing Yondu does it looks like he's going to try is that he tries reaching out to Peter gracefully like a loved one, but yeah, at that point Yondu dies. The Guardians do ultimately come around and pick them both up, and at this point they start holding a funeral for Yondu, and everyone starts honoring them. Peter talks about how he told people as kids that David Hasselhoff, and compares him to Yondu, how they go on adventures, they did all this cool stuff, and how he kind of did have him, and that Yondu, and that he was right. David Hasselhoff was his dad, and just pretty much, and yeah, it sounds cheesy, but he ultimately brings it back around by saying that Yondu was his real father. He was the one that raised him and kept him safe. Pretty much everyone pays their respects, and they pretty much do their best to have a Ravager funeral, putting his casket, burning his body up in colorful fire as they slowly let it float out into space. And it turns out that they actually do get a proper Ravager funeral. As it turns out, other Ravager ships actually show up to the funeral. As it turns out that Rocket actually sent out a transmission to all the other Ravagers about what Yondu did. And so now they're here to honor him and give him a proper Ravager funeral, as now in death, they allow him to come back. They actually acknowledge him as a Ravager. As such, they all shoot off these lights and fireworks and so forth to honor him. In the meantime, Peter goes up to the only crew member of Yondu's crew that was still loyal to him, and it turns out he reconstructed Yondu's arrow, because in the battle with Ego it got destroyed. And he gives it to him, though. And it turns out the crew member also gives him a Zoom, which it turns out was found in a junk pile. And yeah, I know. The joke is that the Zoom is that apparently people on Earth are using them to listen to music now, and it holds 300 songs. Yeah, that's another thing Ego did. He destroyed his tape recorder. So that's a dick move. So now Peter has at least 300 songs he can listen to, and so just everyone is just there honoring the dead. Even Rocket saying that even saying that Yondu was kind of a bastard himself, pushed people away, took batteries he didn't need, because there's a thing where Yondu said that he and Rocket were alike. And it's just a nice little sappy scene that definitely hits you in all the feels as Gamora and Peter share a moment, and at the same time Nebula leaves herself, and Gamora does give her a bit more explanation about why she did the thing, why she always fought Nebula. Gamora tells Nebula more of an explanation about always why she fought to win. because she was a little girl and she was afraid because she wanted to live to the next day, so she was doing everything she could to survive. And while it doesn't excuse what happened to Nebula, at the same time, what she's doing now, she thinks is hoping to try and make amends for that, because there are a bunch of other little girls out there who are probably just as afraid as her, and so what she's trying to do what she can to do, so she wants to do what she can to make it right, which allows Gamora and Nebula to actually share a sisterly embrace and hug before Nebula leaves, saying that she's going to go kill that she's going to still want to kill that she still wants to kill Thanos, because even if she and Nebula are now on the up and up, Thanos is still a monster. Thanos is still the one that did this to her, still ruined her life, still ruins other people's lives, so she wants to go kill him. And so the movie ends with everyone kind of honoring the dead and just kind of being solemn. But of course, again, Marvel film after credit scenes, and there are at least 4, and I wrote them all down. Hold on. One of them is that same crew guy from before trying to practice with Yondu's arrow, and ultimately accidentally hitting Drax. One involves the Stallone character, as he was one of the people that showed up, as he meets up with the other Ravagers that apparently they were all part of a team like the Guardians, and it was the death of Yondu that brought them together. And I don't know this team. If they show up again, I might know about them, but I have no idea who these characters are. I'm guessing if you knew these characters, you probably would like it, but apparently with Yondu's death, they decide to reform a team and go and steal some shit. We see Teen Groot, as apparently Baby Groot grew up as now a teenager. Guess he grows fast, as he now just spends his time playing on a video game and letting his roots just grow all over the place without doing anything to clean them up. We see the Watchers ditch Stan Lee because they're sick of his stories. But I think the only thing that kind of has more significance for future films is that we see the High Priestess Aisha in her chamber as one of her servants says the High Council wants to talk to her and kind of chew her out for wasting a lot of their resources to go after the Guardians of the Galaxy. However, it turns out that after their latest failure, she's actually now, she has a birthing pod on standby, and she's birthing what she hopes to be the next generation, something that'll augment their species and be able to put an end to the Guardians of the Galaxy. And so, when it comes to naming this being, she decides to call him Adam. And that's the last we see of her. I'm guessing this might end up paying off in a later movie or so forth, because the implication that she's going to be forming a character in the Marvel Universe called Adam Warlock, but whether or not that actually pays off in a future film, I don't know. So, we'll just have to wait and see. So, yeah. Final thoughts? I liked this movie, I did. It definitely carried the same energy as the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Just these characters who aren't really superheroes, just kind of dicks, nobodies, and jerks who are put in situations situations that bring out the best in them. Like, something I like in this movie is that at this point the Guardians are now a full-fledged team. They're not just a bunch of has-beens that got thrown together and decided to work and had to ultimately had to learn to work together. At this point, they're a cohesive unit. I mean, they still bicker and they still argue and they still fight, but they are actual. But something I noticed throughout the film is that they are cohesive. Like for example, in the beginning of the film, the Guardians are setting up a battle plan to take out this creature before it reaches the Sovereign Planet. On our planet, and before all this, they're just they're kind of throwing out jokes and battle strategies, but then Rocket is setting up a sound system so they can listen to music while they work. And while they are kind of giving Rocket crap for doing this, because right now that's not something they should be focusing on, they still are they're still trying to work things out, and even to the point where when the monster they're fighting can't be hurt from the outside, Drax thinks they can fight it from the inside, and so he jumps on the creature's throat thinking he can kill it from the inside, but then immediately Peter and Gamora are like, why the heck did he do that? The consistency would be the same inside and out. He would do nothing. And as such Peter realize that it has a cut on its neck, and so if they can take advantage of that, they can kill it. And so Peter tells Rocket that they have to get this thing to look up so that someone can exploit the neck, and they're able to do that, allowing Gamora to get the final shot in. which it's more cohesiveness, and it's the same thing, and it's kind of and it's another small thing, like when they crash onto Bearheart, while the Guardians are chewing each other out, yelling at each other, making fun of each other, trying to place the blame. The instant they learn that there's an intruder, that someone followed them and could possibly be a threat, they immediately just drop everything and just suddenly go back and suddenly huddle up back with all their backs turned to actually try and form a circle of power. That way they can cover each other's asses and cover any possible angles. Because even with all this arguing and bickering, they're a team. They're learning each other's strengths and weaknesses. And yes, they do bicker. Even in the climax, they are still working as a cohesive whole. They know exactly, they get on each other's nerves. They fight, they argue, but they're a family. And especially helps when they do learn that Ego is in fact a bad guy. They know that, like, even when Mantis says it's too late for Peter, Ego's probably gone to him by now. None of them hesitate to say, when they say, we need to go back to save him, with the exception of Nebula, but that's understandable. But yeah, at this point, while they may argue and bicker, they are a family. They do stick together through thick and thin, and so even if they do get on each other's nerves, they want to be there. They'll still be there to protect each other, and they do kind of form a somewhat cohesive whole. Each of them playing to each other's strengths, working off each other in fight scenes. It's actually really nice, and I do actually enjoy that. It is very enjoyable, and of course we still have the humor in this movie, and I think for the most part it hits. Like, I think there are like maybe a couple jokes that don't exactly land and feel inappropriate, like in near the end when the crew member that was still loyal to Yondu gave Peter a Zune. It's supposed to be this heartfelt moment where he talks about where he gives him a parting gift from Yondu before Peter gives him the arrow, but he says it's mostly what they're listening to on Earth now. It's got mostly like 300 songs, and if you know anything about a Zune, you know that in terms of music players, it's considered a piece of junk. So I guess it kind of feels inappropriate. So that I feel like that is meant to be a jab in a moment that's supposed to be this somber and serious thing honoring a character's death, but at the same time, it also does. But at the same time, and of course, there's also the David Hasselhoff joke, which I've heard people kind of feel gets old, but admittedly, I kind of think that's why it's funny. It's a stupid joke, even from the beginning. As they keep trying to utilize it, it is a stupid joke, but that's why it's funny. It's just so dumb, and they keep using it, and it's actually sort of humorous. Hell, during the end credits, they actually have a song tailored to the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the final line of the song is David Hasselhoff saying, "We are Groot." It's so stupid, but I love it. So I don't know. I guess something like that is that the humor can sometimes cause tonal whiplash, like in the funeral scene, as they're trying to be serious and yet they're still talking about David Hasselhoff. That doesn't feel like it meshes. That doesn't feel like it should mesh, if you ask me. But with that said, there's still a lot of interesting stuff in the movie. Like, for example, the character arcs, though this one's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I'll explain why in a sec. Like, for the character arcs, we do have quite a few of them. Like, we have Peter learning about kind of learning the difference between it's essentially a nature versus nurture thing, because on the one hand, his true father, his biological father is Ego, and who he's never known his entire life, and now Ego's here saying he wants to be a part of his life and does seem to be genuine about it. Even in the end, even during all this, he's trying to convince Peter that he wants to bring him into his fold. Like, he wants to make Peter like him, a god, higher than all the other people in the universe. Like, it looks, to a degree, it looks like he's trying to be parental, and Peter almost falls for it. But on the other end, you have the Guardians and Yondu. The Guardians have become Peter's real family. They have bickered, they bicker, they argue, but they're there for each other. They support each other. They help out when they need to. They help out when they help out when they have to or they want to. These are people that, that's meant to be kind of the thing with the real family. Especially with Yondu. Yondu, there's a more character arc with Yondu, and it goes into his history as a Ravager and as Peter's parental figure. Because Yondu, at this point, when we learn that Yondu's sector of the Ravagers is Ravagers in name only, you start to actually see that side of Yondu. That apparently, that pretty much he feels like he's lost everything in his life. That he's lost his honor because of a Ravager. He's lost he's lost his honor because he's a Ravager who just hunts and scavenges and does all these illegal things. But even then, he doesn't even have that. As since when he started taking jobs for Ego, he became lower than the low, to the point where even they don't want anything to do with him. The only thing he has left is his crew. And then when when Taserface pretty much leads them on a pretty much charges a mutiny, he feels like he's lost that too. Like he's just losing everything, and you start to see it it starts showing. Like in the fun, like when you see him just sitting there doing nothing as all of his loyal crew members are being thrown out the airlock. It's like in his eyes, he is losing more and more. He did still have more, but it's just that it's not until he learns that Peter has has finally met his biological father, that it finally stirs something in him, and he decides he needs to do something. And ultimately, it's him saving Peter that he feels the only worthwhile thing he has left he can do. Because despite he's done so many bad things in his life, even with the Ravagers, he's he's done things that have broken their code. But Peter is the one thing in his life that he has done right by. He's been there with Peter. He's raised him. Yeah, he constantly said, well, these people wanted to eat you, or he constantly gave Peter a tough time, but he was there for Peter. He cares about his well-being. He wants Peter to be safe. He wants Peter to be safe despite everything. And yeah, he gives him crap all the time, but it's there so that he's doing it because he wants Peter to be stronger, better. To do things he can't do. And so when it comes down to himself versus Peter, he's willing to let he wants Peter to survive because Peter is the best part of it, is the best thing, is the one thing in his life that he did right by. He's kept him safe, kept him from going to his dad and being turned into a battery for his psycho plan to take over the universe. It was him saving Peter that became the only light in his life. And so when it came down to saving Peter or saving himself, it was always going to be Peter. Because as his final line said, Ego may have been Peter's dad, Ego may have been Peter's father, but Yondu was his dad. Yondu was all, and it's really nice, and I do like that. And we do have other character arcs in there too, like with Gamora and Nebula. We actually, as we see the conversation kind of get to a full blown "I just want you dead" sort of mentality, as Nebula just keeps gunning Gamora down. But eventually, even despite all this, Gamora still tries to save Nebula. Nebula finally just breaks down and says, I didn't want to win. I didn't want to keep doing this. I just wanted a sister. It's something small, but it does start opening up conversation between them, allowing them to actually communicate with each other and actually talk. It finally allows them to see the pain the other goes through, with Gamora saying that she was afraid. That's why she kept fighting to win. She was afraid of what would happen to her, that she wouldn't live to see the next day. And so she kept fighting for her own life to the point where it wound up costing Nebula hers. And Nebula felt like that she didn't have anyone that she could rely on. That the two people that she know were supposed to be familial were just hurting her more and more. Like Gamora kept beating her, so she kept having parts of her replaced, and her father being the one that ordered these things, saying that he had to keep up with Gamora. It's just like a giant slap in the face, and it does help add on to more layers. And on top of that, it adds layers. And when they finally allow them to actually just sit down and talk and realize that they at the end of the day, they shouldn't have a beef with each other, that their father is the real enemy, and that they need to learn to grow as sisters and as family. It's something that I like. And of course, there's also something with Rocket too about how he is a jerk to push people away because he doesn't want anyone getting into his heart because he knows it's empty. Which, that one I feel is the least developed story in this movie, but all the arcs kind of have a continuing trend of family, of what constitutes real family. And that's kind of how it goes in the film, with Peter's familiar relationships with Ego, Yondu, and the rest of the Guardians, to Gamora and Nebula as they have to learn to get past the tragedies in their lives and actually grow closer. To even Rocket realizing that he does care about people and he's just kind of a jerk to push them away. It's all there to try and help build to try and help establish what the film is about. Just what constitutes real family. Now, of course, and again, a downside of this is that, but this also constitutes kind of the downside of the film too. Because of all these continuing plots, it does get a little hard to keep track of them a bit. Like, they are good plots, and I am interested in these arcs and seeing them go, but as shown with Rocket's arc, it's sometimes you kind of can go a little too far. Like, again, with Yondu, Peter, Ego, the Guardians, Nebula, Gamora, and then freaking Rocket. Like, all of that kind of gets a little jumbled together. Like, not to the point where all of them are bad, but it doesn't feel like all of them. But it feels like that they're kind of overlaying each other, and I feel like they could have toned it down a little. Like, because of this, one of the plot points, one of those arcs, the one with Rocket, I feel is the least developed, and is the one I just kind of feel towards. Don't hate it, but just kind of towards. But of course, but that's, again, like I said, double-edged sword. Like the arcs, probably could have been toned down a little, but that's just my thing. I like I do actually like the build up too, and I do like kind of just seeing everything converge, and I do like that. So I do like all of that. I love the environments that we see throughout this movie. They're all pretty alien and fun to look at, especially the planet Ego. It does look beautiful and luscious and lively, but then of course when you actually see the core of the planet and have the final fight scene, it's a joy to watch. It's an effects fest that pretty much has 90% effects throughout this, but it's just so cool seeing the environment actually turn against the heroes as they're trying to find their way through it. And it's really cool and super fun to watch. And when Peter starts using the environment himself, using his own celestial powers against his dad, it is just so cool and just so really nice to watch. You can't help but not love it. I thought it was really good. Really good and just super fun and just super cool. And of course, the acting I think is still nice. Everyone still turns in a great performance. Chris Pratt does great as Star-Lord. Vin Diesel's still playing Groot, and it's still kind of funny how he plays it because now his voice is tiny. I love the performance they gave Yondu. Actually does the actor they got for Yondu. I'm sorry, I have to look this up. Was he Kurt Russell? No. I forgot who played him. Maybe it was Dave Bautista. I think it was Dave Bautista. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember everybody. It all feels really nice, and I like it. It actually does work, and I also like Kurt Russell. That was it, Kurt Russell. And I actually do like Kurt Russell as Ego, and I'll give some compliments to Ego as a villain. Like, I didn't know a thing about Ego prior to seeing this movie. I didn't know a thing about him. In fact, it was actually after I watched the movie that I looked him up. Apparently, in the comics, Ego is a literal living planet, which is the whole idea with the planet that we see in here, because Ego's face in the comics is a planet with a face on it. He is alive, he talks, that's how he gets around, and at one point Ego actually does shape the planet to look like a face, because again, the entire planet is Ego. So I didn't mind the big changes because I had no idea who Ego was, and I'm guessing in the comics he is not Star-Lord's dad, but for what we got here, I don't think he's bad. His motivation is generic, of course. It's the standard, all must be me to be good, blah, 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 and sort of thing. But I admit he's actually I do kind of like his attitude. Like, when you see Ego on screen and him actually interacting with people, you can buy that he's Star-Lord's dad. Because they both have very similar attitudes, similar outlooks, similar mannerisms. It does look like they're cut from the same cloth. And it is kind of fun seeing him actually talking with them and just kind of being himself. But which ultimately makes his turn that much more of a hit, because in a way he's kind of like because in a way he takes the attitude that Star-Lord has, but you take away the morals. Because in his mind, because he's celestial, he can do whatever the heck he wants. That he's above all those mortals out there in the universe. And Peter, because he was raised by those mortals, he's friends with those mortals, and his mother was immortal, and Ego admitted to being the cause of her death. He's not exact. That's where they have their split. And again, his motivation is generic, but again, he's entertaining to watch in a way. It's kind of a thing. Again, he's not great, but he's slightly entertaining, and I think that's actually kind of what's nice about him. Seeing him just kind of throw everything in his, even in the climax as as he's holding down Peter, he's still kind of talking to him like Peter, just knock this off. It's useless to fight me. Just let it all go, and you can be something better. It's like a patronizing dad talking out of his son, which is exactly what it is in a way. And he holds it, and it's just the general attitude he has throughout the film. Whether he's just kind of arrogant, he holds himself up. Even when he introduces himself to Peter, even when we first see him, he's like, I thought my dashing good looks would just kind of throw it out, would kind of give it away. In a way, yeah, so even if, like, by large standards, he is sort of generic, especially in his motivations, but I would be lying if I said he wasn't entertaining to watch. So, yeah, kind of a flaw in the movie, generic motivation, but I can let it pass. And again, there are still a lot of emotional moments in here. Like, again, we got them with the arcs. Even Yondu's death, I think, has a lot of weight to it because he gave his life for everyone. I like the funeral scene. While they do try, the jokes do kind of distract a bit from it, but otherwise, it doesn't. It actually does feel solemn and nice and good. So, so on the whole, I actually do think this is a really good movie. Like, I actually do think it does actually feel like an expansion from the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, having the character, seeing the characters now kind of using their reputation as heroes to kind of go to try and get more jobs while still kind of being jerks. Seeing I liked the arcs, though I will admit that they could have toned them down a bit. The jokes are nice, though I don't think they were needed in a lot of it, in a handful of areas. I like the acting. I love the characters, though, again, the villain is still kind of generic, but still entertaining. I love the pacing. I love the effects. I love the worlds. It all is still very nice. It still definitely still brings it all together into a very big and just fun movie that has plenty of good emotion, plenty of good characters, plenty of good arcs, and is overall, I think it's really a nice movie. It's fun. So it's just a really nice movie. It's fun. It's heartfelt. It's action packed. It's just really good. I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen this film yet, I recommend going to see it. Yeah, that's all I have to say on that one. So, yeah, thank you for watching, everybody. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week as we finally take a look at a certain Webbed Wonder's first solo foray into the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Spider-Man: Homecoming.